Hello everybody, welcome back to the shop. What you're looking at here on the bench is just some scrap structural square tube that I've been cutting for the past couple days. I had a little job, and here's some remnants from the job I was doing. And today's video is going to be all about TIG welding for the beginner, and I think this is a real fine way to start with some scrap material like this. If you look at this 3x3, this is 1/4 inch wall, and you know, because it's rounded on the edge, that makes a nice groove there. You could lay a pass down the center there like you're doing a root pass, and then start building the edges out. You know, it's easier to get your hands on stuff like this than it is to maybe buy some test plates or something like that, and they get kind of expensive, and you don't have to go through the trouble here of beveling plates or anything. And there's some 5-inch square, 1/2 inch wall, and that's a very common joint right there, one coming into the other, and you could get plenty of beads in here. You could learn to fill some gaps in there, and then start building out. And because it's 1/2 inch wall, you don't have to worry about it overheating on you, or putting the heat too high and just having the weld puddle drop out on you. What we're really after today is to give you a long look at the weld puddle and practice your rod feeding skills, and just play around, turn the heat up high, melt some steel, and just really start taking a look at that puddle. It's just a good exercise. It's going to get you plenty of time behind the helmet, and you'll be filling quite a bit. You could dip, you could use a lay wire technique. We'll go over both of those. But like I say, this is just good exercises that we're going to go over today for the beginner. Maybe you finally went out and got yourself a TIG machine. You know, maybe around the holiday season somebody's going to just drop one off and give you a gift of one. Who knows? But if you have a TIG machine and you haven't really started with too much as far as you know, structural tube or anything like that, this is a good place to get started. I do a lot of sheet metal TIG welding, and generally when people want to learn how to weld, I don't generally start them on sheet metal. Sometimes they get frustrated when they don't have the foot pedal down, or they don't have heat control down just yet. So if you were just to roll in here and want to do some TIG welding, you know, I just go over to the scrap pile and grab some you know, structural tube and let you have at it. So we'll try and get to some long arc shots today, and put something together good for you. And feel free to just play around with your own TIG welder. And right at this stage, there's no right or wrong or anything like that. Like I say, we're just learning how to feed the rod, and we're seeing what the puddle does and how it reacts. So let me get some stuff set up, and we'll get right into some TIG shots. Okay, here's just a couple shots to show you what we're going for here. Here is a piece of 3-inch square coming in at a 90-degree angle to another piece of 3-inch square, and we just laid our first bead in there. And here's another section here where there's a long angle brace coming into the same 3-inch square, and again we just laid a pass in there. And like I say, that's a nice long weld. Gives you plenty of time to see the puddle, to dip the rod, to try different techniques, play with different heat settings, and you know, really get the feel for the weld. And what I'm using today is a Miller DX200 TIG machine. I've got there's the TIG torch. I threw in a 1/8 tungsten. I don't have a monster cup on there or anything. We're flowing about 15 cubic feet an hour of argon, and I have the machine maxed out at 200, and I will vary the amperage with the foot pedal if I need to, or we'll just go straight at it with full pedal. Again, we're just melting some steel here and feeding some rod. You know, if you watch those videos and you see the guys running perfect TIG roots on pipe and stuff and making perfect welds there, well, everybody's got to start somewhere. And the more time you spend behind the helmet there, the better you're going to be. So let's start melting some steel here and see what happens. Okay guys, we just ran that particular joint. I had the pedal maxed out. We stopped in the middle. We made a restart in the middle and continued on to the end. And I was using a 3/32 rod in here. And we can put another pass in there if we wanted to or not. And when you're trying these, you know, start and stop and make you know, starts and stops all along there. Get the feel for that. Feed the rod quickly or not. You could leave some undercut. You could overfeed and make the bead round. You know, just play with it and see what's going on with the puddle and try different things and see what works best for you. We'll move on to another joint now and try a different size rod, and we'll see what happens there. Okay, on this particular joint we had a little gap in there and we filled that, and I used a 5/32 rod, and you can see it fills quite a bit faster than the 3/32 and leaves a nice joint in there. And like I say, fool around with different size rods. For something heavy like this 1/4 inch wall, 3/32, 1/8 inch, and 5/32 is something you probably want to have on hand and play around with. And like I say, the couple of joints I did right here, I just had the lay wire technique going, where I just had the wire in the puddle, and whatever the puddle wanted, the rod would satisfy it. I'm going to show you how to feed some rod, and you can practice, and that'll help you with your welding along the way. Okay guys, one technique that you're going to need, no matter what kind of welding you're doing, whether it's sheet metal or pipe or any kind of anything, is how to feed the rod. And this is how I do it. I keep the rod between these two fingers right here, and I pinch it with the thumb and move my fingers back, and then loosen with the thumb and feed it forward in that kind of motion. And that works real good for feeding the puddle and making a nice smooth weld. You got to be able to feed the rod into the puddle as it needs it. So you want to start with a thicker rod. It's easier to feed. This is a 3/32, 1/8 inch, 5/32, something like that. The thinner rods are kind of a pain until you get used to it. But that's the motion. And try it with some gloves on too, because 99% of the time you're going to have some gloves on. And when I have gloves on, for some reason I put it in the next two fingers, and that works out better for me when I have the gloves on. And just feed it right through. And you could just have a rod in your hand, while you're sitting around watching TV or something. And it has to become like second nature. You got to be able to feed that rod as the puddle needs it. So it's something you want to practice. And like I say, just on this scrap metal that we're doing today, they're long joints and they need quite a bit of rod. And it's easy to start to get good at that the more you do it. So something you should practice when you have some free time. And we'll do a few more joints here, and I'll dip the rod and feed it in, and hopefully you'll be able to see it. Okay guys, we ran that long joint there, and when you have your torch, and you'll play around with it and see how you like to hold it. Everybody likes to hold the torch differently, but what you want to do, you don't want to be leaning to one side and favoring one side of the metal. You want to be just about 90 degrees and in the center of both. You could angle it forward just a little bit, 10-20 degrees, so you could feed the wire and dip it in there and feed. But you need to be melting both sides, and that was a straight pass, not much of a weave. We come in here now and do a weave, and if we're doing a weave, again, you want to keep that centered and move in that kind of configuration to do the weave as we're feeding the rod. So torch angle is kind of important. You want to keep a nice tight arc. You want to keep your rod in the gas shielded area. You don't want to take it out way far out and bring it back in. You want to keep everything nice and tight in there, and when you do that, you'll come out with a nice weld, and it'll be structurally sound. And like I say, you just have to sit there and make weld after weld after weld, and working on this big structural steel. The parts won't overheat on you and get all twisted up and start to change how they weld. So like I say, if you have the opportunity to grab some cutoffs from a local steel shop or something like that, they're super nice to practice with, and you could get a lot of hours of weld time off just a few pieces. So we'll continue on and make some more joints, and I'll keep showing you some different techniques. Okay guys, another thing while you're fooling around with all this scrap steel is you want to switch your hands up. And if you're right-handed, put the torch in your left hand. And that's how I just did this last one. If you start from the beginning, when you first start welding, it's going to come a lot easier to you. It'll make your welding a whole lot easier if you could feed with your right hand and adjust the torch and do everything you need to do with your left hand if you're right-handed. You know, opposite if you're left-handed. It's very helpful to be able to weld with both hands, especially when doing pipe work. You come up one side with your right hand, come up the other side with your left hand. It makes it a whole lot easier. Any kind of welding, a lot of times where you just can't get in a place and you want to be able to switch up hands. Start from the beginning and put a bunch of time in with your opposite hand, and pretty soon it'll come natural to you, just like your dominant hand. So just another thing to start practicing when you first get your TIG welder going and are just fooling around with scrap steel. Okay guys, we're covering the basics here, and you want to be able to feed the rod, you want to be able to control your heat, and the final thing you want to do with precision every time is end your weld. Now we're going to do a weld here, we're going to be full heat, and then we're just going to pull it away. And you see it's going to leave a big crater or fisheye or a bunch of different names for it. And you don't want that. That's basically a hole in your weld. And then we'll make another weld and we'll taper off and we'll pull back nice and easy, and you'll see the difference. And you want to end your weld right from the beginning when you first start practicing. You want to end your weld properly and not just quickly and abruptly end and leave a crater. So we'll do a couple different ones. I'll show you the wrong way first, show you what that looks like, and then we'll do it the right way. Okay, we just ran a short weld, and when we got to the end, we just let go of the heat there, pulled away sharply, and you see we've got a little crater right there. I hope you can see that. Got a little crater. And that's not what you want when you end your weld. Now we're going to make one, and we'll taper the heat off gradually, and I'll show you what that one looks like. Okay, when you end your weld, you want to gradually taper the heat, start bringing the torch back, and break the weld, and you won't get that crater in there. When you're working in a joint or something, when you're working in something such as this, and maybe you're going uphill, maybe you're coming downhill, you could sometimes take it out of the puddle, walk it along the side here, and pop right out of it. Just depends on the joint, what you're doing. If you're doing some pipe work, you could pop out along the bevel. If you're just doing some flat work, you're going to want to taper off gently and pull the torch back. Just depends on the situation, but don't just come to your weld, be welding nice and hot, and then pull the torch back and take your foot off the pedal. This is going to leave a crater every time, and that's not what you want. So if you start with these few basics, heat control, watching the puddle, seeing what it wants to do, feeding the right amount of rod so you don't get any undercut, all these basics, you're building on these basics. Your hands, they're just going to get these motor skills ingrained in them, and you'll be able to feed the wire and move the torch real well. But you want to start out right. You don't want to start out with bad habits. So take your time, pick up a bunch of scrap steel, some heavy stuff, and you can weld on that for many hours without it distorting or twisting on you. And spend as much time as you can behind the helmet there, looking at the puddle, making adjustments, and learn from every bead, see what you're doing, and make the next one that much better. And just have fun with your welder, and keep practicing, and before you know it, you'll be laying down perfect welds every time. Hope you enjoyed the video, and if you liked it, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. Let me know if there's anything you'd like to see. Just send me a comment. And as always, I appreciate you watching, and we'll catch you on the next video.